Okay, so I'm going to then switch to the opening session. Thank you, Simon, for attending. And thank you, Dave, for accepting the challenge of being here. We propose several topics to discuss today. And we also have been receiving different questions in the questionnaire about different topics. So I will start with something easy. And Pablo Domingo was asking us how to incorporate strategy scenarios into our strategy discovery process. That it's a very open question, and how to facilitate a mapping session. What will be a good way to facilitate a mapping session? So, Simon, if you want.
Yes. Okay. So let's start in reverse order, shall we? How to facilitate a mapping session. I think you've got on your mirror board, if I remember rightly, you put in how to create a map. Can you expand it in that a little bit? Because that looks really quite good. On the right-hand side. There we are. Good. I presume, Dave, this is actually from your book. Is this right?
Yes, yes. But I can talk to this, Simon, but I think you should kick off and then I can jump in over this after you.
So the simplest thing when you start out mapping, fundamentally, the purpose of maps is a means, a mechanism of communication, gaining consensus within a group of people around a particular space. So we often start, the basic characteristics of a map is that it's got some sort of anchor or some sort of component which things are, shall we say, are navigated around. So we could say users. If you're doing the cup of tea example, it's a business selling cups of tea, so it would be users and the business, and they share a common need, and that need, in this case, the provision of a cup of tea, has itself needs. So cup, tea, hot water needs kettle, cold water, and so at that point, what you've got is anchor and a chain of needs, and that gives you a graph. Now, in order to turn that into a map, and the distinction between a graph and a map is that in a map, space actually has meaning. We actually have to add on the concept of consistency of movement. And we do this by putting an evolution axis at the bottom and simply going through our chain of needs and saying, how evolved are these components? And that is what is a map. Now, the simplest way of doing it with people is just to find a problem and sit down with people and say, okay, we've got this problem. Who are the users? What are their needs? What are the components involved? How evolved are those components? And it's the act of actually drawing a map I find enables conversation and people to highlight things that are actually missing, highlight things where we may have been custom building stuff, which is a commodity. A lot of stuff comes out of that process of simply asking those basic questions. So normally, where do I start in an organization? I can start anywhere, but normally you start with a problem. You don't just go map for the sake of mapping. You normally have some sort of issue, so you start mapping around that space. So that's my super quick introduction. There we are. Dave, do you want to go through your example here?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Simon. My name's Dave Anderson. I'm an architect at GP, and I wrote this book, The Value Flywheel Effect, which I can come back to later. And this is one of the techniques that I would use. And often, if you scroll up a tiny bit, I would start with a really simple value chain. And often I've done a lot of mapping. So what I usually try and do is start, and this was an example that I'd done for some people who were thinking about a conference and the impact of COVID on a conference. So I find there's two ways that you can do this. You can send people a load of information and get them to read everything in advance. So sometimes that works, but often it doesn't. You're better to say, let's start really simple. Who is the user? And that often that as a question can maybe take an hour's conversation because there's some teams that are not quite sure who their user is. They'll say there's a million different answers. So once you lock down to a very simple value chain, and I try and keep this as simple as possible with maybe 3 or 4 elements, really just to almost constrain the problem. And for this time, it was an attendee as a need for knowledge, then that depends on attending a conference. And personally, I tend to do these a little bit rougher in the business environment. You could get very deliberate about which comes first, knowledge or conference. At this stage, it doesn't really matter. So I would do something super simple just to start off the conversation to get us moving. I would then introduce the Wardley map axis. We are bringing the Genesis custom product and commodity to start thinking, let's just put these more or less in the center and maybe introduce the concept of movement. So here we've seen a physical conference, there's movement towards a virtual conference. So that sort of describes like a clarity of purpose that we now have a physical thing moving to virtual, right? So that just gives kind of some indication of how the map works, and the fact as well that it's okay to change this because this is actually a conversation, and I'd be trying to get whoever you're mapping with a part of that conversation. And then the next one down, you start to introduce some dependencies. Let's maybe think about, and I kept this for this example, I kept it simple because I don't like to go too fast, too quickly. Maybe break out a virtual conference requires a platform, which we're sitting on Zoom now, and the platform requires AV skills, which is put together a virtual event. So you start to see what I would call hidden dependencies from the attendee. The attendee isn't necessarily aware that there's maybe AV skills, audiovisual things going on in the background. And then as you scroll down to the next one, you start to add emerging components. So now as our value chain with knowledge and conference to the right, we're going to slightly move that to the right because it's slightly commoditized. Let's look at the more additional things that maybe I would call emerging value. Maybe there's access, which now it's a virtual conference. We can have real-time content, on-demand content. Maybe there's prime content that we can say it's exclusive to this event. Maybe you can talk to the speaker of the conference, which is quite difficult. That speaker chat in a physical conference, just because you start to think about what are the extra things we could bolt on. And then as you start to, I wouldn't say speed up, but get more into the mapping session, then if you go on to the next one, this is what I'd often do is I've probably jumped ahead a few steps. I would often do this to effectively present the map as a record. And the way I would kind of structure this is you'd have the map in the center. I would put our new value chain on the left. So we've got an attendee. We've now got an emerging need of access and another emerging need of personalization. So I'd keep that as a very simple value chain. And then on the top right here, what are the climatic patterns? Sometimes there's bigger things at play, like COVID will accelerate virtual adoption that maybe wouldn't have happened in 2015. Equality and diversity of attendees. There are things that are high level things that we call out. And then as you start to analyze the map, observations, like number one, we have a new need here. Number one, we can actually use segmentation to personalize content. So you start to have commentary towards the map. And I'd often try and lay it out this way with the map, the value chain, the climatic patterns, and the observations. Now, this looks a bit kind of busy, but I think as you build it up, you take the mappers with you in that conversation, and everyone feels a sense that we've created this together. And then for anyone who was not at the session, they can look at the observations and say there's 6 actions. So I find this to be quite useful in a business context because you're really guiding and facilitating and the conversation is the most important thing.
That's really good. Do you mind if I riff off this a little bit?
Go for it.
Good. First thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to get rid of some of the lines that we've put on here, just to clean it up a little bit. Sorry about that. And what I want to do, just return it back to how it was normally. A couple of things I want to point out specifically with a map. If you take any different component, like for example, you've got networking here. All right. One of the things about maps is that you can challenge a map. You can say, look, I don't actually think networking really is custom built. I think it's way over here. It's way more in the commodity type space. And you can do that with a map. And because what you're saying is, I think there's something wrong with the map. It's quite difficult to do this with the person, mostly because what's happened is we've got an entire industry which runs around telling people that to be a great leader, you've got to be a great storyteller. And therefore, when I challenge, if somebody's got a story and I challenge their story, what you're actually saying is you're not a great leader. And then people get very defensive about that. So if I think, somebody's got this story about this and I say, networking, I think you are wrong about networking, they get very defensive and blah, blah, blah. But on a map, you can just simply say, I think there's something wrong with the map. It avoids a lot of these sorts of politics. Did you find that at all, Dave, when you were doing it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's when this is in a PowerPoint and it's really nice, and I've spent like 3 weeks trying to fine tune this. It's very difficult for someone to say, I don't like the way you've laid that out. It's almost a challenge to your art. But the nice thing about maps is the ability to inspect and adapt and change as you go through it. Like, for example, in this map, the network in there, I would say that was more or less networking of people. You know what I mean?
Fair enough. Yep. No,
So,
absolutely. I took it from the point of view of networking of systems. And I can say, I think that there's something wrong with the map. And you go, actually, the map is representing networking of people. And so we say, oh, okay, maybe it's worth putting people brackets in there,
and that's
just to clarify. And we've made the map.
absolutely. And that's the thing you would unlikely do in a presentation because of all the social pressures of doing a presentation. But if you're doing a map, it's okay to change it now. This is just an image in this mirror. I did this with ExcaliDraw. But if this was an actual map, I would just rename that because that's effectively a defect in the map where it can be misinterpreted. So we'll sort that out.
It's easy. So another thing to note with a map is that each of the lines, we talk about them as needs. So this needs that. What they actually are bidirectional flows. So they're exchanges of something. So normally something goes down a line, and I'll use a slightly different color, and something goes up a line. So in the case here, it may be knowledge and skills are going up. So we'll go, I'll try and use a smaller pen, actually. Hang on a second. You might say something like skills are going one direction. And you might say in the other direction, what we've got is going money. There we are. Each of the lines actually are exchanges of capital flow. So it could be capital flow, could be things like money. It could be some sort of physical asset. It could be knowledge. It could be some sort of practice. It could be all sorts of things. So each of the lines normally represents some sort of exchange. And so that's also a useful technique when you go through and go, where's the money going? What am I getting back for the money? Or what am I exchanging on each of those lines? Have you done any of that sort of stuff, Dave?
Usually, yeah. What's nice, I think, is the dependency allows a deeper discussion on it. And what I think is nice is you would actually talk about what that need is and what that dependency is and kind of dig into that. So I know we'd often think about cost. We'd often maybe mark lines if there's a large cost element to a relationship. I think the exchange is interesting, probably more in conversation, I would say. But what I find when you get to this stage of a map, the conversation is very rich. You almost want to get to this. I would say this is like a semi-completed map, and that we'd have a lot of conversation, and those conversations would come into the observations. That's how we try and capture them.
Yeah,
it's a great point.
So
Yeah, Simon Wardley, sorry, we have a question. Simon Vondrasek, sorry,
Yeah,
has a question.
just call me Simon number 2, and it's easier. A quick question to Simon number 1. Can you give examples of these exchanges down below in the map? Because I feel like it's the lower you get into the map, the more technical the exchanges, more about data exchanges it will be, but maybe I'm mistaken. So maybe you can give an example of that as well.
I'm not. So this is the first time I've seen this map. So let's start drawing on it, shall we? Sorry about that. So we're going to have $. Simon draws lousy dollars. Hang on. Let me get a slightly bigger mouse. Give me a second. Right. Let's try that again, shall we? So $. There we are. Slightly better. That's going that way. No, sorry. That's going downwards. Okay. And we've got knowledge, say, coming back. Right. So some of that money is going to be spent to go down to buy prime content. Some of that money is going to go down for the actual virtual conference, and there will be people involved in that. And some of that money will go down to the actual platform. And some of that money will go down to different AV skills. And so you're getting exchange back. You're putting money into AV skills. You're hoping you've got something coming back the other way. So, for example, it would be maybe technical competence or something like that. The platform itself, again, maybe distribution or something along those lines. There'll be something you're getting. You're not just giving money for a platform just for the hell of it. There is a reason why you are spending money. So you can go usually quite far down these sorts of things. And again, when you're paying for your conference, personalized content. So again, some of the money will be going in terms of gaining knowledge. Some of it will be going in terms of gaining access, or you hope, and some of it will be going maybe a small bit for personalized content. And then the return would be content relevant to you. And then, okay, if it's personalized content, now this is what is the link here to collaboration. So one of the things I would do with the map is I'll start thinking about these exchanges. Once we've got to an idea that this is a good enough map, and then we've got consensus, I start going through asking these questions about what are we actually exchanging here, because sometimes it'll show there's missing needs. Like, so I would immediately be going personalized content to collaboration. What's the exchange that's actually going on there? Because it might show something else. Dave, can I ask you that question?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I would say one quick point is one of the things about when you do a type of map like this is always down in the bottom right, you have something like platform. That seems quite invisible, but that actually enables a lot of the things on the top left.
Yeah.
So without the map, we could spend all our time talking about the platform and never get talking to the stuff in the top left. Doing the map almost squares that away, so we can have the important conversation about the stuff in top left. So I would say the personalized conversation and the collaboration, there's definitely a connection between attendees and how do we keep that together. So there could be potentially another dependency there where maybe there's like pairing or maybe breakout sessions. We think about how can you improve the richness of the experience of the attendee by creating those links. If you have 100 people attending an event, can you maybe spot 10 people who have a lot in common who could really have a super group together? So that's what I would call an emerging need that in a physical conference, you would hope that happens. In a virtual conference, you can say, let's plan for that and actually design for that, as opposed to just hoping people meet when they're drinking coffee.
Okay, so now if we're taking our attendee here, and I'm paying to come to something, or in this case, it's a free event. Thank you ever so much, Holger, and everybody else for providing this event. There is some value that I'm getting back and something I'm exchanging. So going to a free event, we're actually exchanging something. We're exchanging our time. We're exchanging almost a commitment to the community to be involved. And we're hoping to get back from it knowledge and access to people, and maybe personalized content, i.e. stuff that is directly relevant to me. And so that's one of the things I do like about, I'm biased towards mapping, I've been doing it for 18 years, is it helps to concentrate on what are the things we actually are getting, what are we exchanging as well. One of the questions was about strategy and scenarios. So let's throw a few scenarios. Let's go knowledge. The knowledge is all going to become a commodity over here because of another component, ChatGPT and large language models. Let's put that onto the here. Let's go, boom, let's have a new component here, large language models becoming a commodity. So we've got things like GPT-4, etc. And this, as a result of this, is driving knowledge to more of a commodity. What does that mean? So in your scenario, for example, what does that mean if you're an organizer of a conference?
So I would say there would have been a time a long time ago when you would have paid money purely for the knowledge of an event. And that was the thing that I have now got this secret advantage over everyone else. And the democratization of knowledge makes that no longer the case. But I would think that because knowledge is evolving so quickly, again, what we're doing here today, and I think this is a great example, is this idea of having a conversation about a topic. That's the richness, because some of the insights you'll get from this type of conversation, it'll be hard to get that from a website or a book.
So one of the things you do with maps, one of the things I do like to do with maps is because there's no time on a map. So we should put a time. Roughly, when did you do this map? Would you say?
I think it was just about maybe it could have been 6 months in the lockdown. So it would have been around end of 21, I would say.
End of 21. So let's go November 21. It's always a good idea to put a date on a map, because now we can say, okay, we're no longer November, and here we now can see the influence of LLMs being industrialized, potentially impacting knowledge. So any assumptions that we made in terms of the knowledge going in that direction, and hence the money coming in this direction
Reduces. Yep.
reduces. It might not be loads of money. It might be a lot less money because, there isn't that exchange. So what we've got to do is, if we're a conference organizer, we've now got to think about access and more on personalized content as well. So the question then becomes, does things like LLMs impact personalized content, and does it impact access as well? Possibly it does both of those. In particular, I would say there's one area. So I'm just going to move ChatGPT down to the bottom. If you go something like LLMs, and we say we got GPT-4, and GPT-4 is just one, and there are many other examples of this. And we say that's having an impact here. It's also going to have an impact in terms of collaboration. And this is the whole space of conversational programming and conversational design, going back to Nicholas Nickpont's work on architecture by yourself. The process of design is a conversation between two or more perspectives in the heads of one or more designers. And well, the difference today, so this is November 2021. Now let's make it November 23. The difference between that is we are likely to see us actually having conversations with the machines. And this is the whole sort of collaboration with the machine. So not only is knowledge industrializing, this is changing as well. So now we've got two scenarios going on. So how do we cope with the fact that maybe our personalized content and our knowledge people want to pay less for those?
And I would also say that with the way the content is with large language models, it's now a lot easier to say, if I don't attend this event today and I get all the videos on demand, I can just say, ChatGPT, summarize that event for me.
Or even better, create my own event for me.
Yes, exactly.
I'd like a video on the importance of mapping for strategic play. Just create one for me and I'll watch it.
Tell me what I need to know.
Tell me what I need to know, yes.
So these three needs have actually all shifted to the right. So then that, again, one of the things we talk about is space for innovation. So what is the new need that's opened up on the top left of this? Maybe we're getting towards, maybe it's a more action-oriented attendee, because it's no longer maybe in the olden days, you'd have maybe a 5-day investment of an event. Maybe now it's like a morning or something where you can condense the information. So is there something else that you may do with that time? Maybe is there something we can do to put the things you've learned into action? You can actually, maybe it's not just consuming information and letting it mull. There's actually consume information and try something new, especially in the tech world. You could learn a skill in the morning and experiment with it in the afternoon, how quickly these things are going with the cloud, etc. So again, as this stuff moves to the right, it's what's the new need and how does that affect the exchange of money?
Yeah, because access, on-demand content, real-time content, all of those things you can see in this world are all driving over here as well. So the only thing really is potentially here, the space down here, networking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So I think what's fascinating is the richness of the conversation you can get from a very simple value chain.
Yeah. Yep. Well, hopefully this was an example. Who asked the question, by the way?
The question was from Pablo, the initial question.
Is Pablo here?
I don't know if he's here. Pablo Domingo, are you there? I don't know if he's here.
Because I was going to say, have we answered your question?
I think he's not here. To me, there is also something interesting in this map. It's the climatic patterns. I used to also do the same thing that Dave, to start the conversation, also adding the climatic patterns. In the lines of capital flow that you have put from the attendee to the knowledge, and coming from the platform, it's interesting to represent the volume that the platform enables to many people to increase the competence. So it means that there is more people generating content. And at the end, this is also what makes that money available, let's say in that way, is shared in different way.
So just to re-emphasize that point, when you're saying climatic patterns, it's basically us going things like that is becoming a commodity. So It is us describing those standard changes to see on a map. Now, there is something actually, which is, I just want to take your mind to something else. If you remember, I put that big section at the bottom of this mirror board. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Can you zoom in on just a little bit more on the collection side? So this is the manufacturing industry. So one of the things when we talk about drawing a map, let's imagine we're drawing, and Jackie and a couple of others in this audience have been through this process. I have 12 research groups looking at different areas: retail, finance, healthcare, for example. Manufacturing is one. But you start off, if we talk about manufacturing, what matters for manufacturing? Manufacturing is an enormous field. There are so many different components. And so what we often do is we start off by just saying, tell us what you think matters. And people will put down words. Now, here's a small example of words. Things like sovereign risk, over-the-air updates, mid-scale manufacturing, predictive maintenance, forecasting. I've got one which was cybersecurity, and it has about 200 odd words in there. Apparently everything matters. But how do you get through this and get to the point of what actually matters? So the first thing we tend to do is we categorize things. That's that next section along. So you can see there, manufacturing, we've gone materials, metaverse, skills, lifecycle management. What we've done is we've started to group these words. And this is a graph of the space of manufacturing. And what we will do is we will take a couple of these themes and try to map them out. And there's a reason for doing this, because we're now trying to map out an industry to find what matters. And it's a bit like mapping Paris. What matters in Paris? You send out 3 teams to map out Paris, and you come back and you ask them to say what are the most important features, and they'll mark on their maps what they think is important. And then what you can do is you can cross compare, and you go, oh, look, the Eiffel Tower appeared in every one, and it was really important. So that must be an important area to focus on. Whereas Pierre's Pizza Parlor appeared in one, so it's not so important. So what you're doing here is in the earlier example, you're very much going down a particular theme, and then you can apply climatic patterns and have that discussion. In here, we're trying to find what the theme should be. So they chose 3: automation, agile, manufacturing, supply chain. Then they went into the process of mapping those out. I don't know if you can expand on any one of those. There we are, one on manufacturing supply chains. So they start, what in manufacturing, what do we mean by supply chains? So you start off with manufacturers, and manufacturers need things. They need return on capital employed. They need to have products. They need IP around design. They need agility in terms of their operations. And then these have a whole bunch of other components which depend upon, which make that actually happen. So you have a discussion between the group trying to expand out what does supply chain mean from the perspective of manufacturing. Then if we just move over one, you have this conversation about, you've got a rough map of Paris. What's the really important bits on Paris? And so here, the group now uses the maps to highlight the things that they think are important. So quality control, sustainability, flexible contracts, logistics, data analytics, supply chain, active management, and they prioritize a few of them. Now, because you've taken multiple maps, and Joachim, if you just go down the screen a little bit, you'll see there's several maps there. We don't have to zoom in. The different maps are highlighted different areas. We can then bring them all together. So this is what we do in the consolidation bit. So if you want to expand on that, and it turns out that the things that really stand out and really are important are things like supply chain awareness, right tooling, customer dynamics forecasting, sustainability, and data analytics. Now, there's a couple of other dots here. It's because we're doing comparison. So we do comparison between analysts and ChatGPT and Bard. And according to analysts, the most important thing is process improvement. According to mapping it out, the most important thing is actually to understand what's in your supply chain. And then just the final bit, you can summarize this down. So you end up with a couple of key messages, like things like sustainability needs useful metrics, management doctrines, a right tooling really matters, and supply chain matters. Now, once you've got those, you've now got your target areas. And so this is now you're into this phase of, okay, we can really now start to zoom in on this particular space. So if you're looking at a very broad area and you just don't know where to start, it's often just ask people what they think is important, get them to categorize those into sort of themes, choose a few themes, map those themes out, ask them to put what they think is important on the maps, and then aggregate the maps. And that'll give you a target to go and look at. In the case of manufacturing, it's things like sustainability and supply chains. Then you can start the process we showed earlier of really diving in detail in those themes and having that sort of discussion. Dave, what did you think?
Yeah, I've been part of a few of these groups. I think it's a brilliant process. I think there's a few things that are important here. The collection categorization is a super important step, just to kind of get those initial ideas. I think given the fact that there's a group of people who are all aware of the area, I think is important because they have different knowledge and insights. And I think it's a great process. I think it's good drawing the initial map, but the analysis phase I thought was very interesting. I hadn't really done that as much before. I think it's interesting, really turning the map into something action oriented.
Yeah, there is a lot of, this is the qualitative work, but there is a quantitative work that is to find the data that in reality gives you that what you are thinking as a group, in reality, it's real, or at least more real. So I have Simon Vondrasek, or Simon 2. He has a question. So sorry, Simon.
Yes, question to Simon. How do you deal with important outliners that might be in there somewhere, which gets ignored because it wasn't mentioned too many times by the participants?
No, you're absolutely right. Again, so this was a fascinating one. I've done this, as I said, for about 12 different industries so far. And one of them was in transportation. And so one of the outliers was things like virtual. You wouldn't have thought transportation is about its cars, it's self-driving cars. What's virtual got to do with it? But during this process, so if you look at the beginning, bubble of words, there was no mention of virtual on there at all. And when they categorized, they didn't even look at virtual. But in the process of mapping it out, this theme of virtual came up. And when they started to talk about what was actually important on the maps, it was reinforced. And particularly by, as Yaki mentioned, we have, when I do this, it's with diverse groups of people from around the world and different experiences in that space. I had several city transport planners. One of them was from Budapest, one's Dusseldorf, involved in this group. And of course, they were like, to begin with, what's virtual? And what they realized in going through the process is that virtual is, in fact, a transport system. And it has a direct impact on other transport systems. We're all traveling virtual miles to be at this conference. Typically, going back to Dave's example of a physical conference, we'd have got on planes, we'd got in cars, we'd got on trains. So this virtual conference has a direct impact on the transportation system. And these city planners had spent a small fortune building digital twins of cities, which is great for monitoring, trying to work out congestion of cars and all the rest of it. But in these digital twins, they'd ignored probably one of the most important transportation systems, which is virtual, because the congestion we cause on a road by coming to this conference is less than people cycling or less than people on a bus because we don't cause any. And so it has a direct impact. So what was really interesting about that process is something which started off not being mentioned and would, if I said at the beginning, virtual is a transportation system, they would have laughed at me. I hadn't even thought of that anyway, but it came out of this process and it became one of the key things. And it's the same happened with healthcare. It turned out that we're very good at monitoring clinical output, not health outcome. And so that bubbled up and became. So I understand your point. And I do agree, no process, all maps are imperfect, no process is perfect. But my experience so far is it has allowed some things to drag out.
Yeah, I think just building on that, I think this is a great process, but it's what I always say to people when you're going through a mapping process, it's not a finite model that we're going to execute. You know what I mean? It is a well-structured, it's like a design process. It's a well-structured process, but you figure out on what's the knowledge and how the conversation's going. So you need to be open for those surprises and those iterations. And I think, Simon, the way you facilitate those sessions is brilliant. It's kind of very open and people get a chance to kind of speak and there's space to correct. And so it's really important how you facilitate those sessions, make people feel safe and at ease. I know any good facilitator, you make the group feel that you can just be yourself and kind of speak up. So I think that's really important how you facilitate these. One thing that is if you're kind of practicing to kind of do these with some peers, one of the things, I think there was a question about, do you do this on your own or in a group? For me, it's always in a group, but I think sometimes it's good to practice by yourself just to get the feel of it. And one thing that myself and two co-authors, Mark McCann and Mike O'Reilly, would do is almost use mapping as sense making. If you have a very complicated area and you're trying to understand it, almost do a quick map yourself. And that's something that I had done a few. There's a quick example up there of security. I think it's the bottom map in security, where I put an example as sometimes if you have a very complex area, you may take a trusted source, like for this one, it's the bottom one there. Maybe take something like the Microsoft Secure Development Lifecycle and just map all those practices and see what happens, and then start to add things on. I don't want to get into too much detail in this map, but sometimes that's nice as a first effort to almost help you do that categorization and word mapping. So it's sometimes nice to practice that kind of sequence by yourself before you maybe do it in front of a group.
Yeah, this come back to the point that we were talking in the beginning, is that there are two worlds, is people that they live in the we know world and people that they live in the we don't know world. When we are doing Wardley mapping, we live in the world of we don't know. So we have to have our minds open to explore what really happens, because in reality, we don't know what is happening. And in manufacturing, I was participating on that research. We didn't know so many things, and we discovered so many things that they were there, but we were not looking at them. And that's also part of the thing. So it's very difficult to turn the people that we know to relax and to recognize that they in reality don't know.
Yeah. As the designers say, you have to commit to the process.
Yeah.
And like, I know, Simon, like these sessions, they're often 1 hour sessions. Commit to the hour, open your mind, and that's it. Like you don't spend an entire day at these sessions. It's nice to have a small focused mapping session and keep it like an atomic habit.
So I do a more accelerated version.
Thank God.
I do, but the key is it's no more than 2 hours a day, because I found you cannot. Long time ago, I used to do has-an analysis of quite complicated environments, and we used to limit ourselves to 2 hours a day. And I find the same thing here. If you're going beyond 2 hours, just stop, go and do something else, because it becomes really difficult to continuously think about a space for longer than that. You need to take a break. And I don't mean a short 10, 15-minute break. Go and do something else for the rest of the day.
Yeah, it's like sometimes authors will say, like, I write an hour a day and then I go walk for 3 hours. Yep.
But sorry. Yes, a timer saying 5 minutes. Do you have any more questions for us?
Yeah, but I think it's going to take more than 5 minutes. But anyway, here it is.
Shall we summarize then?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
How can we, that's very complex. How can I visualize the transformation of an IT infrastructure? How do we indicate, this is a good one. How do I indicate dependencies that they are not implemented yet in the future roadmap?
Okay, so off those two, can we pick the second one, which is how can I visualize the transformation of an IT infrastructure? Let's do that one, because that's so easy, because I just go, Dave, didn't you do this at Liberty Mutual?
Yes. Yep. Don't want to say by the book, like, but yes, myself and Mark and Mike, we did a lot of this, and just very quickly. We were part of a very large transformation, moving to the cloud with a 100-year-old Fortune 100 insurance company, and we basically mapped We kind of mapped out what are the needs of senior stakeholders, of customers, of different things. So we constantly mapped out the needs and try and predicted what was becoming commodity. I think that's the big learning, a part of a transformation, because you'll always see in a transformation, there'll be an investment in a certain area. One of the big wins that we had was we could see potential investment in a lot of IT infrastructure, and we could see the serverless modern cloud wave coming. And we were able to say, hang on a second, let's be very careful how much we invest in IT infrastructure, and let's invest in sort of engineer skills instead, so we can leverage higher order systems. So I think doing those very simple value chains and trying to predict what's going to move time and time again, the thing that was important was like technical leadership, engineer skills. It wasn't the lower level stuff, like which version of Kubernetes will you run? That's not that important. It's the higher level people stuff, the socio side of socio-technical. So much more detail in the book, but it does actually work. One thing that I would be wary of is going too much into the detail. And we did have this, if you just go back to that map you're on there on the right-hand side. And what we did for this kind of value flywheel effect, it's just this idea of what's your clarity of purpose, a business goal, what's the challenge, create the right environment, improve leadership. The next best action, create an area where it's friction-free for engineers to move at pace with the technology, have the technology help them do their job, and then long-term value, build your systems in a well-architected problem prevention manner, so you're not constantly working against something. And this is a flywheel that keeps going. And what inertia can you move from this to speed this up? That was the model we used. Very quick summary, but it's not a waterfall plan. I would say it's a very iterative plan. It keeps moving. People often say, do your transformation for 2 years and then we're done. You're never done.
Now, on that note of never being done and things moving, it's important to understand we've only been mapping for 18 years. Our geographical brethren, they've been mapping for, I don't know, 1,000 plus. They've had more than that. So Babylonian clay tablets, so 2,000 plus. So they've had plenty of time to get their mapping right. We've only had 18 years. Our maps are still, it's like early geographical maps. There's certainly nothing like Ordnance Survey maps are today. There's no 1 in 25,000 or 1 in 10,000 scale or 1 in 1,000 scale. We've got that all to come. So they're all very primitive at the moment, and there's different ways of doing it. We're still trying to find our way.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, we are on top of the hour. I thank you so much for the conversation. It was an unexpected conversation for all of us. So I am very happy how it worked. So now let the people to jump into the other sessions and enjoy the day of the mapping. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the previous work done, and talk to you soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.